I mean, if you're somebody that just hunts once a year.
There he goes again. What minute are we at?
We are at 9 minutes. Scott has already
I mean,
thrown...
if you're just hunting, continue. Maybe.
What's up, everybody? It is a fine day. I guess I don't usually intro podcasts like that, but we haven't actually recorded in a little bit, so I'm going to tell people that it's a good day.
It feels good, Jim.
Hopefully when you're listening to this, it's a good day too, and then it matches up. But Mark and I are sitting here on our usual side of the table, and across from us is Ruben Alexson and Scott Parks. Both of them have been on before, but we haven't quite talked about this topic specifically. I'm really excited to talk about it because, Scott, you've been shooting for, I don't know, how many years now?
Couple decades.
Rube, you've been shooting for like your whole life, right?
Twice.
I believe I pulled my first trigger when I was 5 years old.
Okay, so
on a gun that has a combustion.
That sounds like the intro to like a super dark documentary.
It does. Mark, you've been shooting for quite some time as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say more from hunting perspective, but yeah,
right.
I mean, I pulled my first trigger probably when I was about 5,
You got to
6,
look
something
into the
like
camera.
that.
You got to look into the camera when you say that, so that they
Yeah.
could get the documentary feel.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Maybe some shadowing.
Now, I haven't been shooting quite as long as any of you guys, but at least enough. And I can say, without a doubt, we didn't ask this question or anything before we started this, but without a doubt, I can say that I'm sure all of us have at some point missed a target that we thought we should have hit and wondered, why the heck did I just miss that target?
I don't follow Jim.
And immediately your mind goes into what went wrong. And there's a lot of potential things that can go wrong and cause you to miss a target when you're shooting, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
there's like countless variables in terms of shooting. So we wanted to do this. This is sort of your troubleshooting guide, but it's maybe a troubleshooting guide that's actually worthwhile, because I know usually when I go online, I find troubleshooting guides for like
it's
anything.
troubleshooting if you're having trouble shooting.
Yes. Wow. But anyway, so we wanted to go through and just discuss, like, when you miss a shot, what, and speaking with you guys, having all this experience, what are the things that go through your heads? And it can depend, because sometimes you can be missing a shot at close range. Let's say you're shooting at just 100 yards, right? A distance that people commonly sight in at. People usually don't have too many issues just getting on target at 100 yards. But sometimes you're missing there and you're wondering what's going on. Or the thing that I get most frustrated with myself, I know, is when I start missing out at longer distances, because then it just becomes more and more difficult to figure out why it was that you missed. Because you have, there can be equipment, there can be atmospherics and weather conditions, or just, whatever's going on there. Or the oftentimes forgotten element is shooter.
I think there's really two main reasons why you wish, or why you miss. There's a lot of reasons why you wish. The first, really, like, as you learn how to shoot, the first reason is usually going to be the shooter, right? You need to know how to hit and how to make an accurate shot. And I think that as you learn, a lot of times that's shooter-induced. And as you get more knowledgeable about your platform, knowledgeable about the ammo you shoot and the environment you shoot in, distances you shoot at, then things start to come in like wind, or like some variables like temperature and humidity and all that stuff that can all add up to mean that you miss. But a lot of times, like, I think there's a couple of reasons. And like, if the gun is working as it should be and you miss, it's because of shooter.
Mm-hmm. Like, you guys shoot a lot, like a lot, right? And is that something that comes with practice over time, being able to recognize those small nuanced things, like maybe you're super familiar with your sight picture and what that looks like, or what happened when you broke the shot, and you're like, that was me, that was my trigger press, or that was any number of variables, but like recognizing that when it was the shooter or you, and then what that part was? I mean, do you kind of start to be able to calculate that
over time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, over time, you become very aware of what's happening. We talked about it a little bit when we had Jerry Mitchellek on the podcast about how when you first start shooting and you press the trigger, there's a loud bang, there's an explosion, the gun moves violently in your hands, and you don't know what happened. And then after a certain amount of time and you learn how to call the shot and learn how to know that you had a good trigger press, you see the sights lift and settle, and everything else is just kind of peripheral, right? So, like, what Mark just talked about is like knowing why you miss. I mean, that we call that calling your shot and knowing what happened when you pressed the trigger and when the gun went off. But, you know, in talking about like positional shooting in a past episode with Scott, like there's a lot of stuff that goes into your stance, your form, how you hold the gun, how you get behind the gun, and how you break the trigger. That can all add up into an accurate shot as well, or a missed shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when you're a beginner, especially, which you're kind of alluding to, but when you're a beginner, especially, and you're shooting and you start to miss, the thing that's frustrating is that anytime you're trying to diagnose an issue, you want to eliminate as many variables as possible, right? So that way you can sort of narrow it down to, okay, it's either one of these two things or it's got to be this one thing that's going wrong. But when you're a brand new shooter, it's hard to know. Because you want to assume I'm doing the right thing and I wouldn't have caused any of this problem, but you can't quite rule that variable out. And then you also know, well, there could potentially be an issue with the equipment here, and it could be as far as, you know, the way I mounted the scope to the gun. It could be the ammunition that I'm using isn't right for this gun. It could be whatever. You know, it could be come down to bipod bounce. It could be, you know, all these things. And so that's where it becomes a little bit, I think, difficult. And so how did you guys get to the point? And like, I can speak a little bit from experience. I know that when I've gone shooting by myself, usually it's kind of a crap show. Especially when I was just starting out, I'd go shooting by myself. I'd be missing, stuff wouldn't be going right. I wouldn't know how to diagnose it. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, is this range day pretty much done? Because I'm just going to keep missing because I don't know what to change. And then I'd go out and I'd shoot with somebody who really knew what they're doing, kind of understands firearms, understands, you know, the sighting systems on top, understands what could be happening downrange as far as wind goes and all these other variables that are coming into play. And then they might even point out something really subtle, you know, like could be kind of a ignition flinch or influence on the gun that I'm doing that I never even noticed. Or it could be, what ammo are you shooting? Oh, this stuff I found. Oh, well, what's the twist rate of that gun? Too slow. You know, that happened to me. I remember vividly with a 243, way too slow of a twist rate, heavier bullet, and just like we were keyholing when we did hit and when we didn't hit. It was all, I mean, so, but only having somebody really experienced there with me helped out. And learning from then in the future, I've gone out, and if I miss, now I'm kind of like, you know, going through my checklist of, well, this is what some of the pros I've shot with in the past, or some of the really experienced people that I've shot with in the past. This was kind of the checklist I felt like they were going through with me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think back to kind of when I was at that, you know, beginner stage of, you know, figuring out optics and all this stuff, and doing it on your own, it's definitely difficult, right? You know, and I think it's like anything. If you need help, ask for help, right? it's gonna make the process go quicker, as long as you can find somebody that actually can help you, I guess, right? You know, so it kind of comes down to how serious you are about wanting to, or how advanced you want to get shooting wise, right? I mean, if you're somebody that just hunts once a year.
There he goes again.
What's that?
Just, what minute are we at?
We are at 9 minutes. Scott has already
I mean,
thrown...
if you're just hunting, continue. Maybe.
Wasn't even trying, Mark.
It comes out
that's
so
the
naturally.
thing. It's very natural.
So
Let's try and help some folks here.
So, anyways, you were saying if you're just hunting,
Right, right.
I said
But
if you're somebody who's hunting once a year,
right.
right, and that's all you care about is just that one time for hunting season, right, or however long it takes you to shoot a deer or not, whichever, and you zero your rifle once a year, you're probably going to have issues from time to time that you're not going to be able to figure out because you're not the type of person that really cares about the firearm. You really just want to kill a deer, right? Or whatever you're hunting.
Right.
Per-
Or I guess
performance-
manage your expectations there.
performance
with
in
that
shooting
amount of, you know,
it's almost a direct correlation of inputs to outputs. It would be like the more you practice, the better you're going to be. The more you put into training to make a shot on a whitetail or to make a shot on a target, you might not always hit it, but if you don't, you're going to know why you didn't. And it's like it's kind of like doing a clean and jerk. You know, if you have a mirror to do it and to watch yourself into, you can probably have better form. Like the mirrors in the gyms aren't for looking at yourself; it's for analyzing your form.
I thought they were just so you could take like a selfie where you're holding the phone in such a way that you're flexing your arm a lot, and then take the picture in the mirror.
yeah.
I've been told they're useful for that, but
With
I
the
don't
flash
believe
on
that's
too, so you can't actually see
well.
yourself that well.
Well,
Well,
when
I
you
mean,
go to the
sometimes
range
you
by
miss and
yourself,
sometimes you're wrong, Ruben.
That's also true. I have been wrong once before. There's a thing. It's like when you bring a friend shooting or you go shooting with someone who's knowledgeable. That's your mirror in the gym. That's helping you analyze things that you can't always see on your own. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of going and having a practice session with someone who's knowledgeable about it. And even if they're not knowledgeable necessarily about shooting, you can always say, hey, did you see what I did before I shot? And they said, well, every time you miss, you always move your feet too close together. Or, I've noticed that when you're missing, your hands are stretched way out too far and they're not closer to your body like they should be when you're hitting. I mean, even there's an app called Coach's Eye. And if you have a practice session and you're shooting pistol, you can record yourself in Coach's Eye by setting your phone up on a stand and rewatching what you did in slow motion. And that's even helpful to analyze what you did when you had success or had failure.
It's so true with any kind of a hands-on skill or something like that. It's when you are able to do it, like you can do it by yourself for a certain period of time, and you can feel yourself get a little bit better and better. But all of a sudden, you go and you train with a coach, you train with a trainer that's better than you are, or something like that. I mean, just even in one day, you feel yourself improve so much because somebody from the outside, when they get the chance to look at certain little nuances about what you're doing, and those kind of things can start to, as you become more and more experienced, and get these kinds of pieces of feedback and start to, especially when somebody says something and then all of a sudden you weren't thinking about it before because it was subconscious, but now you are thinking about it and then you can feel it. And you're like, oh yeah, I was doing that.
Yeah.
That helps you start to realize things later on when you are by yourself shooting, or you are, let's say you miss. Now you can begin to rule out certain things that you've done.
One of the reasons why we practice, and I'll speak in terms of like competitive shooting, action shooting. You could look at action shooting as anything from IDPA to USPSA to 3-gun to 2-gun to PCC competitions to PRS, any of those competitions that involve more than just laying down and pressing a trigger or standing and pressing a trigger. There's one of the reasons why we practice and why we do high repetitions is not only, like, I think a lot of times people think that when you're practicing, you're just becoming more familiar with something. And like, yeah, if I just do this enough, it's like I'm building a muscle and then I'll get that muscle bigger and bigger. Well, there's not really a whole lot in shooting a pistol that somebody with really massive arms like Scott could do better than somebody like myself or somebody like Mark, a smaller build, right? There's pathways in your brain that you're reinforcing, and when you figure out how to do something, that pathway, that synapse becomes wrapped in an actual substance called myelin. And myelin protects that synapse or that pathway, that neurological pathway, so that down the road when you need to do that thing again, it's subconscious. You're confident because you know how to do it. Now, there's always going to be people that get lucky and make a running shot on a deer at 200 yards that they've never practiced before. That's called luck. That's typically not called skill. Somebody who's like, yeah, it was the last day of the season, I had to make the shot, and I did. And it's like, for every guy that does that, there's 100 people that missed.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the reason why we practice so much or why we shoot so much is because we're constantly trying to build those pathways in the brain so that just like when you study for a test, just like when you learn something and you study it, that you can pull it up later so that when you have to re-access it. So when I go to the range 3 days a week here at work and shoot on my lunch break, that I'm building those pathways so that when later I'm tested on it, AKA I'm at a match and there is a similar challenge, my brain doesn't have to try and figure it out on the clock because I already know that I know how to do it. Mm-hmm. I just have to re-access that. And so I think like the whole question of why am I missing, it can boil down to gear. I mean, an experienced shooter like Scott can still miss a long-range target because of wind. An experienced shooter like Adam Maxwell can still miss a pistol target because an external factor influenced it. However, the real difference between people who are skilled and people who are not skilled is just the knowledge of knowing what happened and why you missed.
Yeah, I'd agree with that completely. And I mean, I think I've certainly found myself in situations, and I think we all probably have, where, you miss, something goes wrong, and immediately the initial reaction is, dang thing must be broken, And you start looking at it, you're like, yeah, and then you got to explain it to your buddies when they're like, why'd you miss? And you're like, the stupid things, but, and it's easy to kind of want to start pointing the fingers and start taking stuff apart and whatnot, and it's harder to actually analyze everything that happened, the kinesthesiology of you pressing the trigger and all the stuff that happened there. It's sometimes harder to acknowledge that, or even go back and, because a lot of people, I think, especially when they're beginners and they're shooting, they are, like you were talking about earlier, Ruben, or like when we talked in some of the stuff about positional shooting in another podcast with both you guys, actually, they're not paying attention to everything that's going on, right? They're so laser focused on, a reticle and a target that they forget what their body's doing, what their hands are doing, what their shoulders are doing. Shoulders like tense up a lot, or what so many other things are doing. And then kaboom, shake, everything, explosion, stuff goes off, and a deer scurries away untouched, or a target just gets a bullet splash up behind it and no satisfying ring.
If you want to see a really good physical, like real world showing of a fantastic shooter that knows really like how to call shots really well, there's a TV show called The Big Gun, and it featured some guys like Jerry Michalik and Max Michel. Yeah. And if you go to YouTube and look up Hot Shots TV, season 1, I specifically remember this because Jerry Michalik is on there and he's getting prepared to shoot the World Steel Challenge, like steel shoot out in California. And he's practicing, he's going to shoot revolver division. And he's shooting really soft loads. You can tell it's probably like 700-800 feet per second. And on one of the stages, there's a piece of steel that's probably like 35 yards away. And as you watch Jerry go through his practice session, there are times where, like, between when you see him break the shot and when you hear the ding on steel, because it's such a low velocity round, it seems like it's like a second, right? It's like you see the smoke coming out of the barrel, and then like a half a second to a second later, it's like you hear the ding. Well, you can watch Jerry as he's practicing, and like as soon as he, you have to shoot a shot and then run to the next box. Yeah. As soon as he breaks the shot, half the time he's already stepping out of the box and moving, and then you hear the ding. And then there's other times where he shoots the shot and he doesn't even move, but then you don't hear a ding. So like in that time that it takes the bullet to get to the target, to make the sound and the sound get back to Jerry, his brain already calculated that he knew he missed.
That's crazy.
Right. And that's calling your shot and knowing that you missed and knowing that you did something between the time you press the trigger and literally the time it takes the bullet to get to the target.
Yeah.
I think why did I miss is usually more about form and more about fundamentals than it is about gear. But there are certainly times where we select the wrong bullet for the twist rate we have. We have an issue with a piece of gear or something like that. But a lot of times it's just a lack of confidence and skill.
It is.
What about like just like mental preparation or planning? Like Scott, I was just hunting the other day, and for those who don't know, Scott and I have, and you can probably tell right now, a little bit of a banter between like just hunting and like shooting at a high level.
I like when you say it with his accent.
Oh, you're just hunting. Bah. Anyway, I love you, Scott. Anyway, but so we're turkey hunting. So this is with a shotgun. So I mean, I guess you have like you still need a level of accuracy with a shotgun. You have obviously multiple pelts heading out the door,
especially
there.
with a tight choke.
Yep. And we had a bird come in, probably 20 yards ish. He's standing there full strut, but I had some a little bit of brush in front of me, and an evergreen to my left that I was kind of buried in, branches. And in that process, like just reading the situation, like knowing where I'm at, knowing what branches I need to clear, I guess in this case, I'm monitoring the behavior and the posture of the bird and knowing where he needed to get to straight in front of me to where I could just lift my barrel up just a couple inches and take the shot. Or if he starts to come unglued or the situation, comes unglued, what I'm going to have to do. I had mentally gone through like the 3 scenarios that I thought could happen, and scenario 3 happened where the bird got wise, broke strut, and started running.
No,
he didn't attack.
That was my.
That was scenario 4.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, so like I knew like, okay, if this happens, I'm gonna have to raise my gun like this. I have to clear this branch, get to the left, resettle, kill this bird. And we got him, right? So, like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, I had gone through, like, mentally mapped out, like, the 3 things that I might have to do in that scenario, and we ended up, being successful. So, like, what about, I know, like, in multi-gun action shooting, you guys do a lot of stage planning, and this was a hunt scenario where I was essentially doing, like, stage planning, really,
it's the same
I guess.
Thing.
Okay, pretty much,
honestly,
yeah.
So like,
it's no different.
What's that correlation? That mental planning part.
Well, funny you should ask. Like I was saying before, as you practice something, you create these pathways where really the goal. Well, everyone only has so much capacity of what you can think about and what you can physically do, and the things that you can see while you are under pressure. And whether it be at a match or a big buck or a big gobbler steps out, things start to happen. And like pressure is applied.
Big time.
You get a big spike of adrenaline. That doesn't help you really think clearly. But this element of pressure starts to become very evident in those situations. And when we're under pressure, we're starting to use up a lot of that capacity where we're not able to think just like you would think, like, okay, I'm going to walk down the hallway, I'm going to take steps, right? Like, we want to do things that we can practice ahead of time. We want to do that all subconsciously. We want that action to be done subconsciously so that we can actually think, because thinking is something that takes up mental capacity too. So the more that we know, just like when you go to a match and you see all these guys air gunning a stage and like preparing it, they're even counting their footsteps, like where they're going to walk during this portion of the stage. And the more that you can build up the ability to do that and to visualize something, we always kind of refer to it as like when the buzzer goes off, you kind of just want to watch a video happen of that whole stage.
Yeah.
So that under pressure, when things go wrong, you can kind of break out of that subconscious and think about what you need to do to react to the thing that you didn't anticipate. So just like when you're sitting in your tree stand and you're like, okay, this buck might come out here. And if you didn't ever anticipate that the buck might come out behind you and you're going to have to turn, like make a weird shot, like you're going to see yourself like fumbling around trying to get this left-handed shot when it would have just been easier to turn this way and shoot right-handed. Right. So if you think to yourself ahead of time, okay, well, if a deer comes out there, the easiest thing for me to do is actually spin around this way, even though it's counterintuitive. But what you're going to see is you're going to see yourself fumble around trying to switch guns, and I've never shot left-handed. I've never practiced it before. So yeah, I mean, every time that you're put into a situation, you want to be able to react to it and do that thing that needs to be done as much as possible in the subconscious. And subconscious doesn't mean you're not making a conscious decision. It means that you've already thought about the options of what could happen and the different outcomes. And like you said, like if this turkey comes in and does whatever I don't anticipate to do, I'm going to react to that by doing this. But if you had to think of that in the moment, you probably would have shot the limb off of the evergreen you were sitting under, and you might have not, you might have gotten up and made a bunch of noise. But when you had that plan and things went south, that's usually when you can have a good outcome versus I didn't think of this and now.
I mean, if you hadn't thought of that, like in that scenario, like you're talking about in the deer scenario, they're like, you know, been like, oh my god, I got to swing left, and it's like, I'm stuck on this branch. That's
And I think sometimes too that involves bringing the equipment into it as well.
Yeah,
that involves the equipment. So Scott, you've shot a lot of PRS matches and stuff like that. I'm sure I haven't shot one myself, admittedly. Have shot the Vortex Extreme, quasi similar-ish, sort of. But the first time I shot the Vortex Extreme, I remember coming up to the stage, hadn't even hardly looked at the stage ever before, hadn't ever seen the stage before, actually, in many cases. And I was with Travis Baran, and he had all of the yardages for every stage as to what targets we'd be shooting at and how far away they were. He knew what MRAD values he had to dial into his turrets for each target. He knew, what parallax setting he was or he just remembered to adjust his parallax in general, and he had his magazines already loaded, whatever, all that stuff was all ready. And I'm just kind of humming along like, man, this hike is really hard. And then we get to the stage and he's like, boom, his rifle's down. He's like, okay, I'm trying to fold out everything, get it all ready to go, and I'm like, oh, shoot, what do I have to dial? And then I'm on my phone doing the whole ballistic app thing, and it just didn't work. And he's already like, boom, boom, shot his 2 shots. I'm also trying to spot him. I'm like, yeah, I think you were right. He's like, no, I was left. He's actually spotting his own shots too. And but then the next time we came back, and I actually came prepared, and little things like, oh, I blew an entire stage. I missed every shot. Did you dial your parallax at all? No, I was on 100 the entire time. Oh, okay. Well, we were shooting at 800 yards, so that's probably why you missed both those shots. Little things like that happen too. So I'm sure you have to also mentally be prepared to, if something pops out here, I'm either going to have to hold over on this or dial that, or I'm going to have to make sure my parallax is set right.
In a lot of situations, like specifically thinking about long range shooting, that sport in and of itself takes a lot of focus. It takes a lot of you being conscious of watching your wind, watching trees and grass and all of this other stuff. It also requires you to manipulate your firearm. It also requires you to load your firearm, adjust your scope, adjust your parallax, all of these things. And if you start to become unprepared for any of those things, now you're going to take away from your ability to focus on the things that you need to focus on. So that's why having things like firearms manipulation, working through malfunctions, adjusting your parallax, that stuff should all just be kind of subconscious.
Yeah.
So that you can actually use the available mental capacity or mental landscape that you have left to focus on the things that actually require up to the moment focus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I sit here and we're talking, I'm trying to think back to times when when I've missed and I was like puzzled by it, and
Can't think of any.
Well, first I got to think of a
I'll
time
tell you
I
that
missed.
First, I got to think of a time I was wrong.
I'll tell you the common theme to it all is I usually end up figuring it out. It might be a month later, it might be 2 months later, it might be the next day, it might be 5 minutes later. But it usually wasn't my equipment. You know what I mean? Of all my years of shooting, the only time equipment has been my issue, it was my fault. But I had a scope slide in the rings one match.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's literally the only time I've ever had an equipment issue, which isn't necessarily an equipment issue, right?
Right.
That's just me trying to use a new mount for the first time at a match and just not torquing
Yeah,
it
it's like a
properly.
function of user error.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
and that also comes into a lot of times with equipment, which I know like everybody's probably on the edge of their seats waiting for when we're going to talk about like, okay, why you're missing. So it's probably because, whatever's the magic little button that you have to push and then now you're not missing. It's not the case. But when you get into the equipment too, like when people have equipment issues, now I'm not going to say there's never, ever, ever been a product, and I'm not even just talking about Vortex optics. I'm talking about a gun, a accessory on the firearm, ammunition. I'm not going to say there's never been something manufactured that didn't have an issue. But a lot of times, too, when we've seen people have issues with equipment where, they've been shooting forever, they get this set up, they put it all together. A lot of times it's a brand new setup, too, which they just change up. Even if it's like an old gun that now they've just changed a lot of stuff about, or if it's a gun they've entirely put together from scratch, that you'll hear that a lot. And so there's all these variables, and then you just think to yourself, like, there's a lot of parts that had to go to put that thing together. Are they all torqued down properly? There's a lot of things that had to go into mounting up that optic. Did you mount it properly? I mean, you're using the right rings, whatever, all these things. And then, then there's also the ammunition. Like, just are you using the right ammunition? It's not even necessarily that you're using the wrong caliber. Like, most people are going to at least stick the right caliber in there, but are you using the right bullet weight for the twist rate, like we talked about earlier? And so that comes into play too. And I think that's another thing where experience comes into play. The first time that situation I brought up earlier where that 243, like, it was just completely inconsistent. And it was a gun that I remember pulling out of the safe here at Vortex and somebody being like, oh, that gun shoots great. And I was kind of like, sweet, this is in the bag. This will be easy. Zero it at 100 yards. Couldn't even zero it at 100 yards. I barely even was getting it on paper at 50 yards. And then I remember I came back and I was like, this thing's crap. And somebody was like, well, what ammo were you shooting out of? And I was like, this stuff. And immediately somebody far more experienced than I was like, basically, you moron. Like, let's go look at the specs for this rifle and let's look at the twist rate. Okay, it is like a 1 in 12 or something. And I was shooting just way too heavy of ammo for it. And it's just, stuff like that happens. And had nobody ever told me that, I'd have gone on forever thinking, yeah, that gun, crap.
Right. Yeah, and that happens. That mentality or those issues happen quite a lot, right? Yeah. The human nature, just in general, if you're not super knowledgeable on something, you just, you know what you know, right? And in that instance, you knew that gun didn't shoot for you, so it was crap, right? Now, if somebody... Therefore, the gun is crap, right?
Yeah.
I find that really with anything in life, you should probably adopt an it's not me, it's you policy. And that applies to people and
relationships.
Firearms.
Helps a lot with self-image, but success doesn't usually come after that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, that goes back to what I was just saying a few minutes ago about, like, I might figure something out a year later, whatever. It might be 5 years later. I'll be like, all this time I thought it was that. I'm a dumbass, And I can tell you, like, I work with rifle scopes every day, right? Usually there's a gun around every day, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Hold on.
And that's been going on for years, right? And I can tell you, hardly a day goes by that I don't learn something new, You know,
Yeah.
That's what's crazy about it.
I mean,
Yeah.
here we are. I mean, us as a company, Vortex, right? Like, optics are our thing, but we still learn something new every day.
Just yesterday, I got schooled by one of the optical engineers on what an ocular actually does. The whole time I'm just thinking to myself, oh, yeah, it focuses the reticle. If you got a low power variable, maybe it makes your 1x image a little bit better. And all of a sudden he goes, well, actually it works this way, and it does this, that, and the other thing. And like,
If you
the
take
image is
a
flipped
picture-
upside down, and if you took a picture, you put a digital camera sensor in the second focal plane, it actually look different than the way your eye perceives it when it's back. And I was just like, whoa, what?
Jim and I were planning like a 10-minute
We
talk.
were literally about to do a 10-minute talk where Mark and I just explained about oculars, and I was like, I should double check. And then all of a sudden, now it's like probably going to be a full-length episode, and I'm here. Yeah, but to your point, new stuff we learn every day.
I could overhear the conversation, all the stuff going on, and I'm just mouthing to Jim. I'm like, just get him in here. Just get him in here. This is no longer 10 minutes. We're way over our head.
But yeah, to your point. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. So, like, you know, I would encourage people, whether beginner to advanced users, because there's some, you know, there's some advanced users that still want to blame equipment a lot of times, right? It happens. To really try to dig in and find the problem, because the great thing about it is when you finally figure it out, you learn a lot of stuff along the way, and you're not just reading it off Facebook precision rifle page, or, you know, I can't think of some ridiculous name Facebook page right now, but
You say something on Reddit. Sounds like you're pretty experienced with that. I'll say one thing too, and you brought up a really good point when you said like some of that experience comes from having something in your hand every day. Some of the most experienced shooters in the world, they have a gun in their hand all the time. Like, they're always messing around with guns. And like, I don't want to say that, like, I think there's a lot of people that have come into hunting and shooting later in their lives or middle of their lives or whatever. They didn't start with a gun in their hand. But I think more times than not, when you look at somebody who's extremely skilled and like able to troubleshoot things, it's probably just because they've had something or had experience for a long time. And it has nothing to do with wisdom. It has everything to do with knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, it has nothing to do with your mental ability or like your ability to critically think something. It just has all to do with, oh, I saw that once before.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, every
exactly
every time I've been stumped on something with a car I'm working on, I take it over to my mechanic who has his hands on cars every day, drives cars every day of all different kinds. He takes one drive in it and he goes, yeah, there's a rattle coming from the right rear. Let's go check it out. Puts it up on the lift. Checks around. Oh yeah, sway bar link. You know, and it's just like, I mean, instantly, boom, the guy's got it. You know, and it's like,
it's recall.
Yeah,
it's like being
it is.
able to pull from your memory bank. And like, I always kind of hate to say it, but like, if you want to be good at shooting, if you want to be good at guns, you kind of got to be interested in it. And like,
Right.
you know, like it's the same thing when the guy shows up, and I've got relatives and people that show up to hunting camp, and they're like, yeah, I can't figure this out, why I can't hit. And it's like, we'll take a look at it, and it's like, the gun works. It's like, well, how much have you shot it? And it's like, well, you remember last year when I missed. Last October. Yeah, yep, I remember that. And you didn't pursue it further? No. It's like, okay, well, it must really not be that important.
it's all you can expect out of it if that's all you give it.
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna switch gears there. So, or I had a different question. So, continue with what.
Oh
your
no,
thought was.
I kind of was too. So
Oh, okay. Well, here's what I was gonna say. Something that I think.
Very polite
I know.
interaction
I
there.
don't really know what to
It's
think
kind
of
of
it.
weird between knowing that it was between you and Scott.
I don't trust it. I think one thing that's frustrating, and I can think of like one instance where I kind of was going through this is you have a gun that you've shot, you've got experience with this gun, you know it shoots, and then all of a sudden it's not.
Yes.
What are some things that you guys have troubleshooted over the years and found out, or maybe things a person wants to look into, or check this first, you know, maybe an order of operations, maybe simple to hardest, or
the absolute first thing that's going to go through my mind in that instance is, did I change something on this gun?
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Does it have? Did I put a different muzzle brake on? Am I running a different silencer? Was, the last time I shot it, was it a brand new silencer? And now it's got some carbon buildup in it. It's, and it's kind of changed the point of impact.
Yeah.
a
Switch
little
up
bit.
ammo.
Now, it won't necessarily change how the gun's shooting. It'll just shift your zero, right? On not all guns, that's not going to happen on, right? If you got a super heavy barrel, but it will.
It can. I mean, if
definitely
you hang something on the end of your barrel and it gets heavier, it's going to weigh down on your barrel more.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another issue I had at a match one time.
Yeah.
Totally, I went to a match with a brand new silencer. It was a gas gun match and shot about 200 rounds on practice day. Left thinking everything was zeroed. Started shooting the next day. First stage I was on was like this freaking hoser stage, like huge targets. And it was like 15 freaking points, 15 targets. And I think I got like a 2.
See, Mark would say then that's an excuse that you should never practice.
Yes. I think what you've actually done is we've proven against what we were talking about earlier. But yeah. Or, you change up ammunition that you're using. Because I know sometimes that happens. Mark, you've even brought it up a little bit in the past how, your 300 Wisdom is always on the shelf somewhere. But you go on a hunt somewhere and you flew in with your rifle, but you didn't bring ammo or something. So you got to go to the sporting goods store and you use a different kind of ammunition than you sighted in with back home. Or you're just at a different elevation. So you change your location. Or you dismounted and remounted a scope, mounted up a new optic and a new kind of ring, or did something like that too. Those are things that you may have changed.
Absolutely. And then, another thing can happen certainly over time with, with shooting particular guns, however many rounds it might take is, bases coming loose. If you're running a bolt action, like most hunting rifles are, sorry, I can't.
And
Simple.
PRS guns.
And PRS guns.
Don't worry, he's just PRSing. I've been looking for an excuse to use that phrase
for like 3 years.
Yeah.
So if you're running a bolt action that doesn't have an integrated base or doesn't have a pinned base, you're relying on screws to hold the base to the receiver, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a tolerance between those screws and the holes in the base. And every time you shoot, you have a weight sitting on that rail or mount called a rifle scope, right? Mm-hmm. So you get kind of a slide hammer action. So over time, the bases can move. And once they do start moving, typically they're just going to get looser and looser. At first it'll exhibit itself as an impact shift, and it might stay there for a little while. And then also, maybe you're shooting again and you get another impact shift. And then maybe next time you go out, it's just shifting all over the place, stuff like that. But, that's a common thing, man. Mounts, bases, with, or if we're talking about ARs, when it comes with experience, like, I don't know how many times we've had people we've been shooting with or phone calls or, they send us pictures of their guns that they're having issues. And they send us a picture or we see the gun personally, and part of their mount is out on the forearm of the AR.
Oh,
15,
sure.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's, and the thing is like, without, if you're fairly novice or just not all that mechanically inclined, right? Because not everybody's mechanically inclined, right? We get that.
It's okay, Mark.
We're not raising hands here?
It's okay, Mark.
Or you guys just didn't have to raise your hand?
To somebody that's super mechanically inclined or very knowledgeable on guns, that seems like common sense. But if you're not either of those and you have all this Picatinny rail going out, why can't I put the scope up?
So
exactly.
one thing about ARs and their recent kind of like surge in the last 20 years has been that it's kind of Legos for guns, right? It's like everybody can build an AR.
Yeah.
And
I built one in my closet.
I'm all about access. Like, I'm all about making things accessible and getting people involved in that. And the one downside to that is that there's nothing that you have to really know other than like, well, I watched an Instagram, a 4-minute IGTV video about how to install a forearm. So it's like, I can build it. And then you can see issues coming from that.
Yes.
But it's also cool because like you can do it yourself. But
Well,
that's sometimes
and you talk
where you
about
open
learning.
yourself up. It's sometimes where you open yourself up to some of those potential risks. And then there's actually things like tolerances from gun builders that can play into it. I remember sitting in the old building in Middleton, and Scott instantly knows what I'm talking about. A bolt action rifle came in, and a guy couldn't get it sighted in, and he was like, "Why am I missing? Like, why am I missing the target?" This is like the whole basis of the question. And we were like, well, we'll take a look at it. We looked at it and figured out that there wasn't enough windage travel in the scope to get that zeroed. And so like we're like, well, maybe there's some sort of misalignment. And we figured out that on this rifle, the barrel was pointed 7 feet right of where the receiver was pointed at 100 yards.
That's a significant degree.
It's a lot of MOA.
Yes.
When you think about it, it's like we don't actually make a scope that had enough elevation or windage adjustment to compensate that.
Not
and I
even
don't
the
know
5 to 20 razor.
I don't even know a manufacturer that does, because that's a lot. I mean, that's a ton of
Low
windage
power
travel.
variable could.
Yeah, but I mean, you're talking what? You're talking 12 times 7, which is a number higher than anybody could calculate.
So high of a number.
168 MOA total travel windage,
84.
which okay. All right. So it's like I said, nobody can calculate it.
Is it 84? Okay.
Yeah, it is. Okay. So, anyways,
I'll trust you.
we had to put a base system on the rifle that allowed for windage to be adjusted mechanically, not in the scope. So you centered the scope in the center of its windage and elevation travel.
Oh, yeah.
And then mount a set of windage adjustment screws so we could actually physically move.
Well, then somebody like that who's doing that better make sure their parallax is always dialed right, too. Because if you have a straight-on cheek weld with the gun, but your scope is canted off however many degrees, then you're going to either have to make sure your face is getting directly in line with the scope or your parallax is dead.
But think
It's
about
not super noticeable at the scope, though. I mean, you can see
not
it.
so much.
That being said, if you have this issue, I'd highly recommend calling the gun manufacturer and having them fix it.
But think about this, right? from the actual question, why am I missing? That's like not something that most people would think about if you were a novice
How
gun.
did you guys even find
So-
it? I mean,
Well,
Scott takes guns apart all the time. Sometimes even when you don't want him to take your gun apart, he just takes it apart.
Don't hand something new to Scott because it will immediately be in pieces. And you'll be like, wanted to use that. He's like, well, I want to see how it works.
I'm picturing Scott, you, Paul Neese, a bunch of other people, Ryan Muckenhern, all looking at this thing. I mean, somebody who just gets the gun and pulls it out of the box of their house is going to go, neat. And
trying to think of Ryan. I think it was right after I started and Ryan hadn't moved down here yet. But it was for sure me, Scott, Paul, and might have been Tom Leatherberry. But I think Tom shouldered the rifle.
Support.
Of course. Tom shouldered the rifle with his little hands.
Oh, dear.
And he's like, well, the barrel's not straight. And you could actually see that when you took the scope off, that the barrel was like this.
Wow.
From the receiver. And it was very apparent. But it's not something that you would think if you went to a gun shop and you bought a rifle.
No.
And
just assume that they're good.
You went to the range with your brand new box of Hornady ammo and started shooting. It's like, wow, I'm not even hitting the backer that the target's on, right? I'm 7 feet to the right.
Yeah, and that's a good. It's an interesting topic because it's not as uncommon as you think. It just goes unnoticed because the scopes have adjustment form, right? I think one of the, and I'm guilty of this before I started working at a scope manufacturer. I think a lot of people, and maybe I'm projecting here, maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is the case, is that when you buy a gun, for some reason, because it's in most people's minds, it's a precision instrument, like we assume that everything in that gun is perfectly straight, like zero tolerance.
Yeah.
And if there's a problem, well, then it must be this magic tube on top of the gun that I have.
Anything we've put around the perfect instrument. Yes.
Right? You know, because like I said, I was guilty of that for years.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Before I, really got into gunsmithing and working here and everything that led up to now.
Oh, I guarantee I had guns that I wrote off as inaccurate because I mounted my scope incorrectly.
Right.
Right.
I mean, well, like if you go back to what Ruben was talking about, how we had to use those windage adjustable rings, or windage adjustable base, really.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people buy that style base and don't realize that it's a windage adjustable base, and that causes an alignment issue.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
Because there's windage dialed into it,
Right,
and they're
because
wondering.
like most men, we don't look at the instructions for
Yeah.
those rings. We just went to Cabela's, we bought them, and we mounted it, and
with that ring, you should be bore sighting your elevation. You should leave the scope centered left to right, and you should make the vast majority of your
bore
windage adjustment when you bore sight with a screwdriver.
wow.
Okay, on the base.
And
on
that's
the base
not
itself.
and that's not necessarily advertised as that, but it's
No, it's not. It's not. If you've bore sighted a bunch of other guns before, it's not intuitive.
Not intuitive.
You're gonna think,
No.
oh, I'll just do what I always do. Click, 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 click,
Right.
click on the
Yep.
turrets. Yeah.
But if you tighten down those screws and your scope wasn't centered, even the gun's perfectly straight, like the manufacturing tolerances were really good, and you just tighten that rear windage screw down, but your scope is shifted. Now you're gonna have to use all your elevation or your windage adjustment to get it zeroed.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with anything, but it was just misused.
Yeah.
And that's a good point too to kind of lead into is that when if you buy a brand new scope, now if it's from a if you're buying it from a dealer that had it in a showcase, I can't guarantee this because it may have been handled, but if you're getting a brand new scope from us and it's still sealed in the package, the rifle scope is optically centered.
Yes.
The windage and the elevation.
Windage and
Yep.
elevation is
Unfortunately, if you
perfectly centered.
Buy one that was a display optic. The
Yeah.
turrets were probably dialed like an Etch a Sketch, and it's nowhere near optical. center.
Exactly.
One
what
thing
you-
that
I was going to say, what you want to do, ideally, if you are curious about the
your travel.
The straightness of the barrel of your rifle.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say, but I can't come up with the word I wanted to use. It's getting old. Sucks. Happens. But, so if you want to know how straight your barrel is to the receiver.
True.
And actually, it's more to it than that, right? I mean, it's how straight the bore's drilled and compared to the barrel, and then the barrel shoulder to the receiver itself on a bolt action rifle, anyways. Mount your scope up without touching your turrets, and bore sight and kind of see where it's at, and then go ahead and bore sight it and adjust your turrets, but make a note of how much you adjusted,
Okay, right.
and then you can see how straight your barrel is to your receiver.
A little bit of little bit of elevation is always to be expected, though. Right? 'Cause
Absolutely. 'Cause you
there's
gotta
scope over bore height. You got to make up
Exactly.
for that. But a lot of windage is where you should start.
Well,
looking.
yeah, I think to move, even further on Scott's point, like center a target at 100 yards, a round target or a mailbox or whatever through your bore, and then just look where your reticle position is.
Yep.
And if it's high, that means you need to adjust down, which means that there's a certain misalignment.
Yeah.
Right.
Switching gears here a little bit. A lot of the things we talked about thus far, I should say, have been things that you will probably notice at relatively close ranges. Like if you're missing at relatively close ranges, or if you're doing some of these things, they should present themselves pretty quickly. Chances are you're probably not going to be shooting really, really tight groups at 100 yards that are perfectly dead on. Turrets are dialing exactly how they should. You're going out to 200, 300, 400 yards. You'll probably start to see those things right away. As you stretch out, let's say now we're doing the old the milestone of 1,000 yards. This is where I think people start missing again. Even experienced shooters miss at 1,000 yards.
A lot of them.
A lot of them do. And so this is where you start seeing people miss, where maybe they've gone through everything and they've gotten the thing sighted in and they're like, this thing is a tack driver at 100 yards. I know in my mid-range shooting, the turrets are dialing well. I'm shooting pretty dang good. Now we're going out to 1,000 yards and stuff's getting weird. There's all kinds of things that can happen there that I know that I've personally experienced, which is, of course, we've mentioned wind. There's mirage. There's not having the right muzzle velocity pegged into my ballistics calculator, which is then going to spit out my dope that I should dial into the scope. There could be, any number of other things that maybe some of you guys would also think about. What's your troubleshooting step list, if you will, that you start going through when you've seen maybe not one miss, maybe if you can peg one miss at 1,000 yards, like, I might have pulled that one a little bit, but now all of a sudden, no, I'm seeing pretty consistent misses. What's going on here?
Yeah. Well, for me, I'm going to be pretty familiar with my rifle setup, right? So I know what to expect of it. So
how would you get familiar with a rifle? You'd shoot it more than once a year?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
All right.
So, if I miss once or twice, I'm going to, chalk it up to wind, right? However, if I, see my misses and they're, something just really funky, my first step, if I can, is going to be to go back to the 100-yard range to make sure everything's good.
For sure.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And I
So you
think-
don't just keep lobbing them down there like, well, maybe I'll get it.
I think you have to identify the type of miss, too. Is it a windage miss or is it an elevation
Right,
miss?
exactly.
Missing high and low is going to indicate many things. It could be you have the wrong DA. It could be you have the wrong velocity. It could be that you have the wrong twist. Missing left to right is going to typically be something else.
Could also be.
I actually didn't think of that before. I just always thought missing was missing.
It could also be some funky light refraction stuff going on.
Yeah. It could be something as simple as you went out and you got to the range and the guys were like, that's your 1,000-yard target. And you're like, okay, get my Kester out, 1,000 yards, click, okay, update atmospherics, good. You shoot all day and you're like, I have to hold 0.4 mils high to hit at 1,000 or something like that. And then you get your rangefinder out and it's 1,042, right? It's like, oh, well, I guess I did just take the word of the person that said that's the 1,000-yard target.
Yeah.
Right.
Confirm range.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? To shooting's a very, very multifaceted hobby. There's so much to it. You can't, in my opinion, just get frustrated and chalk it up to it must be this equipment.
I also don't think that long-range shooting is a hobbyist sport. I think it's an enthusiast sport because you can. Well, so there's a certain level of like, I don't bike a lot, but I can jump on my trek and I can go down the trails, and it's like I do it once a month or once a week or whatever. Like, I'm not going to get hurt. I'm not going to do anything extremely good, and I'm not going to do anything extremely bad. But
So that's what a hobbyist is.
yeah, it's like. But an enthusiast is going to look into different, like, what's the right tire I should be using for this trail? Like, what's what chain gear ratio? What sprocket should I be using? What type of brakes should I have? Where should I have my seat adjusted so that after 25 miles I don't get back pain? Like, the enthusiast in the long-range shooting sports, not necessarily all shooting sports, and I don't want to make it seem like it's this unattainable thing because it's very attainable, especially now with, rifles coming out like a Ruger American Predator and a scope like a Strike Eagle 5-25. Like, you don't have to have such a huge financial investment into it as you used to 10 to 15 years ago. For sure, it's a lot more affordable. But I think if it kind of, again, goes back to, like, if you get frustrated because you're missing and you only do it once a year, like, you might need to put a little more into it. And especially with long-range shooting, there's so many things where it's like, well, why am I missing? Well, I guess I could just adjust my form, or I should adjust how I am sitting behind the gun. But it could boil down to something so so in depth as if you don't have a Kestrel, you won't be able to figure it out, right? And that could be more for like beyond 1,000-yard shooting. But we were shooting, just to give an example, last year we went out shooting and it was really cold. And you've heard Ryan Wilkenhorn describe the density of air particles when it's very cold versus when it's warm, right? So the air is more dense when it's cold because the particles are closer together. So we were shooting on a really cold day that also happened to be very humid. And we had just gone out and confirmed the day before, and the 1,047-yard target at Coon Rock Range, nobody could hit it with a 6.5 Creedmoor. Like, nobody. You remember Chris was there from Applied Ballistics. And we were like...
Yeah, I was going to bring this up.
And we were like, we could not figure it out. And so we pulled up the...
Well, it was one particular 6.5.
One particular 6.5. And we looked and ran a calculation, and it was because that shooting, the bullet we were shooting, at the velocity we were shooting, it started to go transonic at 1,020 yards that day. But the day before with our atmospherics, it was going transonic about 40 yards further, which is after the target.
Oh,
so
it was
we
getting
actually
really disrupted immediately before the target.
And the particular bullet that we were shooting is just not great through the transonic range.
Okay.
And so it was interesting because the other 3 rifles that we had out that day, the velocity was high enough on those where it was bumping past the target before it started to go transonic. And it was something that we wouldn't have figured out without like certain software and certain things, right?
Yeah.
But we were dancing around a full-sized IPSC shape, a torso-shaped target at 1,050 yards, and we were hitting right, hitting left, hitting high, hitting low, and it's like, okay, we have elevation misses, we have windage misses.
Just everything.
We're missing every which way with this one gun, but at 100 yards, it's stacking bullets inside of a dime. And it was simply because at that velocity that barrel length was shooting, the bullet wasn't going fast enough to stabilize through that at that yardage, however the other 3 guns were. So like when I say that it kind of is something that I think benefits to be an enthusiast about, I say that because there's certain things that, like Scott mentioned, like with light refracting and stuff like that, you just would never figure out unless you just went down the rabbit hole. You know what I mean?
Scott just showed me some weird magic. I was expecting this to be a jump scare video too, by the way.
But yeah, that's totally interesting story though, because like at least at 1,000 yards, I probably would have made the jump to the assumption something is wrong with the equipment. And then, like Scott suggested earlier, nope, let's bring it back to 100 and check there. And then you're like, wait, everything's perfect.
Well, and there's another classic thing that you hear too, because you had multiple people at the range, multiple people who have shot a lot. Yeah. And so then I've heard this one too. Well, I was shooting at the range and, I couldn't hit anything. So I grabbed my buddy who's an ex-former Navy SEAL, Ranger, Marine, Sniper, FBI
he was in
agent.
every special forces and all the government agencies.
Yeah, exactly. And he couldn't hit it either. So it's definitely broke. And so to your point there, it's like, well, no matter who you are, no matter what your credentials are, if something's going transonic just before the target and it's a bullet that's going to be impacted by that quite a bit, it doesn't matter who you are. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so, that's where like your credentials that are sewn in on your jacket or on your whatever,
IDPA vest.
Yeah, on your IDPA vest. Your credentials can't change physics. Physics says, "Oh, cool. I'm still going to do my thing."
No, you're absolutely right, and there are certain things that are just it's weird. I would categorize that as like an anomaly type thing that doesn't come up as quite as much, but like Scott was saying before, there's a lot of factors that go into why am I missing at long range. And, one of the things that we'll do right away with the dealer training classes is use it as a teaching opportunity and say, okay, well, let's come back to 100 and see what we're doing. Okay, we're still zeroed at 100. Everything looks good. Let's take a look at our ballistic calculator, whether that be on a Kestrel or on a phone app. We'll check, okay, inputs. Yep, the zero distance is right. The height over bore is right. The bullet we're using, the twist rate, all that, we'll confirm that. And then if that didn't fix it, we'll confirm the velocity again. Mm-hmm. We'll confirm velocity and make sure that our lab radar or our magneto speed is giving us the right velocity that we think we're getting, which isn't what's printed on the box usually. But that's a whole nother story for another day.
Yes.
But that's simply because the test barrel length and type isn't usually the same as what you're shooting in the field. The other thing that we'll do is, we'll look at the BC of the bullet and we'll see if we have to true the BC. Because when they get, whether it be Hornady or whoever is testing a bullet and measuring the BC of the bullet, they're testing it through that gun. Now, we go and switch from a 4-groove rifling to a 5R rifling. That's putting a different groove and land pattern on the bullet as the bullet goes down the barrel under high pressure, 50, 60,000 PSI, pushing that bullet down the barrel. Well, when that bullet exits and starts flying on its own, those different lands and grooves impact the bullet differently and cut a different rifling pattern into the bullet. So the BC may not be as it says on the box. Now, it's going to be very close, but however, like if you go through and you can measure the BC by, okay, we know our velocity, we know all these things, humidity, we know our DA, we know our temperature, we know our zero distance, we've confirmed the distance of the target we're shooting at, we're checking our angle of inclination or declination, all this stuff, and we're just like checking off this huge checklist. Okay, this discrepancy came from somewhere. And so what we can do then is we can go back into our calculator and check and adjust the BC until what we had to dial on our turret to hit the center of that target matches what the Kestrel's output is. Okay, and so that's something that, again, it's one of those things that comes with putting a little time into shooting, but the and that's been made so much easier too over the last 5 to 10 years too. With there's so much accessibility that people have into going on forums and reading the stuff that normally you would just have to figure out on your own. So as much as I like to see people out on the range, at least go and ask an expert online or ask an expert at a company that makes the product that you're using, because you can save yourself so much time.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about our company, right? If you call here and need assistance with anything gun related, or shooting related, I guess, as far as optics go and whatnot, or for that matter, not even optics related.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Our guys are going to help you. Every guy down there on the phone is a gun enthusiast or competitive shooter, avid hunter.
You can't even say it with a straight face.
You can't even say the word hunting.
Literally can't even say the word hunting without laughing.
Mark he beamed stuff over to me telepathically.
Right into your head.
I just pictured Scott following it.
It's like a big satellite dish.
Big target.
It's like ESPN.
Even if you're just hunting, the guy can talk to you about that too. So.
Yeah. To your point, though, I pretty much it is the folks that we have on the phones that basically you can call into or that you get when you email in here as far as tech support goes. They're pretty much I don't think I've ever had to go to anybody for any sort of like a firearm shooting related thing outside of here that I've ever had. Because basically, like, there's somebody here that knows it, and you can call in and talk to that person.
I think one of the coolest things, and like, not to dive too deep into this, but I think one of the coolest things is that, like, I would imagine that at a lot of companies, not just speaking in the outdoor industry, but a lot of companies, like, the tech support role is kind of like where you get into the company and then you can move from there. Like, tech support here is like, that's the job, like, that people stay there a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just like a stepping stone position where it's like, oh, you start here and then you move. It's like, it's a really cool job to have at Vortex because that's that bank of knowledge that people can draw from. It's so cool too. The guys down there are enthusiasts about what they do.
Yeah, it's totally, it's not like an appliance company. Like, for instance, my refrigerator's not working right now. It's like barely.
I thought
2
you
years
looked
old.
a little like you'd lost a little weight.
It's because I have to run out to the barn to the other refrigerator to get stuff cold. But anyways, and so I had to call and get some parts, and like I could tell, but the tech support person basically had an SOP in front of him that said, if it's this, follow this line, then ask this question, and then ask this question, right? Like, we don't have that here. For one, I don't know how the heck you would do it because there's so
impossible.
No, yes.
I mean, I remember years ago when essentially I was kind of one of the only like the main tech guy back,
Sure.
shortly after you. I started shortly after you did, right? And I remember I was approached, and I can't remember if it was your dad or somebody, and they're like, "Hey, you think there's any way that you can like take this stuff that's in your head and like put it in a put it out on paper?" And I'm like, I'm like, one, I'm not great at writing. Two, like, it would take. I don't know how to do it.
Right.
It would be.
You know?
It's just it's stuff
And
you can't.
It's things like creating a spreadsheet of like what mounts work with which gun. It's like, well, that's a Savage Model 10. It's like, well, what year was it? Was it 1978 to 86, or was it 86 to 94, or is it a new one?
Right.
And then if it's a new one, is it a round one or a flat one? It's like there's so many things that just.
And do you have it?
It's
Is
hard.
it a traditional stock, or is it a chassis that has a continuous rail? You know, like
It's hard. It'd be a big Excel spreadsheet.
It would be. Yes, but you can
Spreadsheet.
always a spreadsheet. It's like my kryptonite. But you can always call in though and
pivot table.
Yeah. Oh, ew, that's even worse. That's within an Excel spreadsheet.
Jeez, Scott.
Gosh, man, I feel so violated.
I feel dirty.
But yeah, to your point, you can't call the refrigerator guy and ask him how to fix the thermostat. Whereas here, that almost can't happen. But so anyway, to get off that tangent, Scott, we should. We're a little over an hour here. Ryan's screen turns red, which is awesome. Still,
It's like crimson red right now,
it
which
is,
means
it
that
is.
you've gone way past what
yes.
you're supposed to.
But I do want to bring up that video of the magic that
Yes.
you were showing me earlier. So what was happening there? Explain this phenomena.
Okay, so it's not like super professional done. I mean, it was done with the time lapse feature on an iPhone.
Oh yeah.
I mean, several years
what
ago.
it
too.
shows,
Several years ago.
So essentially, for those obviously listening audio wise and stuff, basically what we have here is Scott took a video, and I don't know what the distance is.
1,000 yards.
1,000 yards. Okay, looking through a rifle scope, and the rifle scope is basically dead center on a target.
Close as I could get it.
Close to dead center.
Not
And
through a spotting scope with
It was
a
a
reticle?
spotting scope, yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so it's a spotting scope with a reticle. Reticle's as close to dead center as you can get it.
Yep.
Optic isn't moving.
Optic is mounted directly to the judge's table or judge's platform for the F-class range.
Okay.
So it's not even on a tripod. I mean, it's hard mounted.
Yeah.
That platform's like cemented into the ground.
And you had a 10 by 10 canopy over you too, right?
I had it totally boxed in.
Yeah.
And just shooting through a loophole.
Okay.
And I did it multiple times. I did it off of I did a few test runs, so I did it off a tripod way off to the side in the grass and the shade, one day. And then, then I did it on the other side of the range. And then I finally settled on directly mounting the spotting scope to the judge's platform. And I got similar results every time.
Okay.
And the reason I did this, though, was because I'd been shooting at our local range here a number of times. And not every time, but every once in a while, I would go and my 1,000-yard dope would, like, just not work out. It would be, like, 4/10 different. But 800 in was fine.
Okay.
And this
wouldn't
was
change.
4/10 different elevation or windage?
Elevation.
Elevation, okay.
A little bit of windage, too, but it's hard to account for that, right? 'Cause
Right.
you got wind. But the one constant, or relatively constant, is elevation, right? Very predictable generally. And, and it always puzzled me, and I'm just like, it bothered me, And so anyways, it was maybe a year later, and I was actually going down to Oklahoma, and I brought Jim C. with me to his very first non-F-class style match. It was a team match that one of the Oklahoma clubs was putting on. And we went down and met up with Wade Studeville and Preston Pritchett. Preston was the owner of Surgeon Rifles at the time. So Preston had bought a piece of property near the surgeon shop. And we were getting ready for this match, so we went over there to shoot, and we set a target out at 600 yards, like a LaRue-sized target, C-zone flapper. And then a full-size IPSC at 880 yards. And all three of those guys shot, to check their dope, and they were good. And just as it was my turn, some clouds came in. Sun went away, clouds came in, started drizzling just very slightly. So I shoot at 600, center punch the target, dial my dope for 880, pull trigger, nothing. Now, mind you, this is a gun I'd been shooting. I mean, like, I didn't really need to go check my dope. I just wanted to get some trigger time, you know? And I'm like, what the heck? That's weird. Because there's no noticeable wind. And three very good shooters had just shot before me, so, like, we knew what we needed to do for wind. So I shot again, just thinking, well, that was weird. And so I shot again, and nothing. So I'm like, wait, get on that spot. You might get on the spotting scope and see if you can see where these things are going, because there's no backstop.
Sure.
And I couldn't see where they were going. So Wade gets on the spotter. I pull the trigger, and he's like, man, it looks like you're going over the target. I'm like, how is that even possible? And so I shot again, and he's like, yeah, you're definitely going over it. I'm like, I'm just really confused at this point. So I go into my ballistic calculator and start checking things, right? And for this to line, for my 600-yard dope to be what it is, and the 880 to be what it is to get a hit, like, I was going to have to change my velocity that I know is like 2810 up to like 3,100 feet per second.
Whoa.
I'm like,
That's significant.
Yes.
I'm like, this is impossible. So the first thing I did was, I'm like, okay, maybe something's going on with the scope with the elevation turret, right? Of course, I'm not going to admit that in front of these people because I work for Vortex, right? But so I return my turret to 0, and I hold the reticle. I hold over on the reticle for the targets, and the same exact thing happened. Well, at that point, it started raining a little bit heavier, so we went back to the shop, and I'm like looking over everything on my gun, and I'm like, this doesn't make sense, And of course, in the back of my head, I'm thinking about shooting at Winnequa and having this elevation shift, And a couple hours go by, it stops raining. I said, hey, let's go back over there real quick. So we go back over there, lay down, I double check my 100-yard 0, it's good. Shoot, center punch 600, shoot, center punch 880.
And the sun was out now.
So what's happening there then?
Well, I'm no scientist.
No.
So please take this with a grain of salt. But my best guess is it's a similar situation as to when, like, you're bow fishing.
Sure. Okay.
Right? We've got moisture in the air, we've got light. And so when you're bow fishing, right, generally you aim
low.
You aim below the fish, right? Because it's not actually where you're seeing it.
Yeah, light refraction.
Light refraction. So my best guess is it has something to do with that.
And 4 days later, Scott was shot in the back of the head in a car.
Yep.
For discovering something he shouldn't have discovered.
A tinted out black Suburban drove up and drove away quickly. Didn't have any plates.
He shot himself twice.
So of course, Preston, Wade, and Jim, I could tell by looks on their face, they're like, he found something wrong with the scope,
Right.
They didn't believe that I didn't find anything. Well, a couple weeks go by, and I get a call on a Sunday morning. This was pretty close, so that match was in the fall, or beginning of fall, like September or something like that. And I get a call from Wade a couple weeks later. He's like, man, you ain't gonna believe this shit. Me and my brother over here at Preston's property, and this is my Wade impression.
That's all right. I had a feeling you'd change personas.
I'm very believable.
It's not even close. But anyways, he said, me and my brother over here at Preston's property, we're shooting our 300 Normas to get them ready for elk season. We've been shooting this load for 6 years, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, the exact same thing that was happening to you is happening to us today. We're shooting over that 880. And I mean, we know the dope on these rifles, and Wade's arguably one of the most successful PRS shooters in history, right? I mean, he dominated for years. He's a one of the best gunsmiths in the country. I mean, he knows what he's doing.
Sure.
That's what I'm trying to say. You know, and so during that conversation, I said, "Well, that settles it. I am doing the video that I've been talking about doing for years." You know, and that's what this video is. So.
And so you put this camera behind a spotting scope with a reticle in it.
Covered up with a box so it wouldn't be affected by the sun, get heated up or anything like that.
Like the Razor 20-60 spotter or something like that. Yeah, and then you just let it sit there on a time lapse over the course of the day.
Yep, set it up at 8 o'clock, took it down at 5 p.m. 8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Yep.
Okay.
And you get about, and it's ironically, it equates to the exact same shift that when I do see a shift out of that range, it equates to the same exact thing, about 0.4 mils.
You watch the reticle
16, 17 inches.
Move.
Yep.
It's weird. So okay, so being that's in a spotting scope, we know that the reticle then doesn't have turrets. So you're not going in there and adjusting it.
Right.
But the reticle moves, and it's very strange. When I first saw it, like at the very first part, it really happens, especially as you get later in the day or like towards the end of the video.
You watch it goes up and then goes down.
Yeah. But I noticed like at the beginning, it wasn't moving very much. And I was kind of like, am I going to see this thing move like a little bit? Do I need to like zoom in? And then all of a sudden, it really kind of moved a fair amount. And then, it starts to go back down. That's weird.
Seems like almost one stage per match, depending on where it is. You'll have a lot of experienced shooters coming off the line going, man, I had to hold an extra 2/10, or I had to add 2/10, or I had to subtract 2/10, or I had to add 3/10 or subtract 3/10. And you're essentially the same thing is happening. I mean, it's weird though, because you can have two stages side by side, and one will be affected by it, and one won't. You know, it all just depends on, in my experience, the terrain, right?
Okay.
You know, how much moisture's on the grass, whatever, the type of sand that you're shooting over, whatever it may be, you know. But it's a funky thing.
Yeah. Well, one thing you told me, Scott, that stuck with me, and I have a hard time doing when you feel like you've got a gun that's like super dialed, is trust the impact. Like when all things are feeling good and you actually think the gun is shooting good, or maybe it seems like actually the gun isn't shooting good, but trust the impact, you know, and that's, I'm reminded of that again, to be like, okay, well, this is what's happening, and I need to trust that is what's happening, and we can adjust maybe you do need to make an adjustment to account for it, but maybe it's something that you don't make a permanent adjustment at the same time.
Yeah. Sometimes you get a hit and you're like, no way, that's right. And then you go back to the old way and you miss again. You're like, why didn't I just go with the way where I hit it?
Well, sometimes I think as you're learning shooting, the things you're really working on are the shooter. As you're learning, you're working on, how do I do this? What's the proper way to do this? What's my form, technique? How do I get behind the gun? My position, all that stuff, breathing, your trigger position. And then down the road, you really start to nail into like, how do I use the gear? Like, how do I dig into the small minutia of the gear?
Yeah.
So it's like, I think a lot of times as you're learning, that's, some of the things, it might be about you, Mark, sorry.
Dude, guaranteed.
But
I don't shoot.
Well, you said you like to blame it on somebody else. So.
Well, true.
But
I'm trying to get better at that.
It's not him, it's you.
Yeah. Initially, it's a lot about the shooter, and down the road, you can run into things like Scott ran into, even as a very experienced shooter. But regardless of all of that, like, you need to remember the fundamentals. You need to remember your fundamentals of marksmanship and your positions and stuff like that. But mentally and in your mind, you need to know. Everybody knows how to miss a target, but you need to know how to hit a target. It's right. Like if all you're thinking of is don't miss, don't miss, don't miss, guess what? Walking on a tightrope, if you say don't step off, don't step off, don't step off, you're gonna focus on it. You're just gonna create that reality. You're just gonna make that happen, right?
Yeah.
And to hit a target, you need to know how to hit it. So it's like, it's not necessarily just like, why am I missing? But like, how do I hit?
Yeah.
Yeah. In contrast
That's a
to
great
that,
mic drop moment there, Rube.
in contrast to that, or not or I guess in agreement with that, I should say, just a different way of looking at it, is, you know, when I'm preparing to shoot, I'm already picturing me hitting that target exactly where I wanted to hit it.
Visualization.
Yep.
You know, like, because if I go up to a stage with no confidence, like, a pretty good chance I'm not going to do well. You know, I might get lucky. You know,
One
happens.
One of the really, really good shooting coaches, his name is Steve Anderson. He's a guy that's just so full of knowledge, and he's a very fast learner, and a guy that I look up to a lot as a coach. He's like, when we're walking the stage for a USPSA or 3-gun match or any type of shooting that involves, like, hopefully getting into that kind of subconscious flow state where we're just seeing the video playback. He's like, where on the target are you hitting? Where on the target are you visualizing that you're hitting, right? Because if you just see this paper target and you're like, I'll shoot that target, and then I'm going to shoot that target, and then I'll take 2 steps this way and shoot that target back there. Okay, well, your gun moves. It's got this, like, wobble as you're holding it, regardless of how good you are or not. Your gun is going to have, like, a degree of movement within it, so we'll call that a margin of error. So let's just say you think, okay, I'll shoot that paper target in the back of the bay, and you pull your pistol up, you present it, and you break 2 shots. But if your sights were aligned on the edge of the target when you broke the shot, and you have this movement built into it, let's just say we'll call the pistol a 4 MOA gun, and I aimed within 4 MOA of the, or 2 MOA of the edge, missing the target is still within my margin of error, within my acceptable margin of error, because all I told myself was I was going to aim at the target versus aiming at the center of the target, or aiming at the A zone, or aiming at the center zone. Okay, now my acceptable sight picture is different. And just like Scott said, I know I'm going to center punch that target. Well, when my visualization and my acceptable sight picture on that target when I break the shot is the center, then I'm always going to be on the target.
That's a good point.
So it's the whole aim small, miss small, right? Like, we always attribute that to, like, The Patriot, and it's like a kind of a cool movie, and, like, a lot of, like, I don't know, a lot of America in that movie.
It's kind of a cool movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie. but like, a lot of times, I think if you say aim small, miss small, most people would know that you're quoting that movie.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing as, like, going into hunting and thinking, like, do you think to yourself when you're aiming at a deer, do you think just shoot the deer? Anywhere on the deer is good.
The body.
Shoot. If I hit the brown, we're good. No, absolutely not. You're aiming for a very specific spot, right behind the shoulder, or wherever it is that you like to place your kill shot. Like, that's where you're aiming. It's and the more granular and detailed you can get on where you're aiming and where you want to hit, whether it be on a steel target or on a life-size target or on anything, right? Like, whatever it is that you're shooting at, the more you can visualize exactly where you want to hit, the more accurate of a shooter and the more precise you'll be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the last things I would throw out there to echo some of those things too, but to also just make this known to people is, like, it's okay to miss. Now, I know obviously when we're talking about specifically, like, hunting scenarios and stuff, I know when you're actually on the hunt and whatnot, it doesn't definitely feel okay to miss. I still know plenty of very experienced people that have gone on hunts and have missed. You certainly hope it's a clean miss, but, you know, it's okay to miss, and plenty of people do it. Plenty of people with some crazy credentials too. And I guess what I would suggest people do when it happens is to just really dive in and try and think about why it was that miss happened, and actually try and just consider the entire environment, consider you as a shooter, what was around you, all these situations. Were you prepared for the shot that you were about to take? And, you know, because I think when it really boils down to it, when it comes to equipment being the issue, again, equipment can be the issue. But I've generally seen that when it is, it's actually pretty obvious. Most of the time when you miss and you're left sitting there wondering, how the heck did that happen? Now, everything looks fine. and everything kind of, and then you really kind of start looking closely at things, and you're like, everything seems fine here. Something must be broken. That shouldn't be the first. If everything looks fine, everything's characterized, working fine, you take it to the 100-yard range, you shoot it, it's still zeroed. If all that is working all right, chances are that it's actually all right. And that's okay for things to be all right, but to still miss. That's normal.
Scott told me when I started one time, if you're troubleshooting and somebody is missing a 100-yard target that they were hitting the day before, if they're missing a clean miss on a 100-yard target, unload the gun, point it in a safe direction, and shake it. If it sounds like a maraca, it's the gun. If it doesn't, it's probably not.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, and even if it requires you to look a little bit more closely too, but I mean, eventually Tom Leatherberry did see that barrel was pointed way off, right?
Yes.
Or you eventually see when you take the scope off and you look at the rail, or you tighten down the base to the receiver, you're like, whoa, those were really loose. Or, you look at the rifle scope, and if it is an issue that with the rifle scope, it's, the turret, when you dial a turret, it's all bound up, parallax knob's all bound up, something like that. The reticle's jumping around inside the scope when you dial it. I suggest checking your rings, because when you take the scope out of the rings, I would almost bet that tube is going to have a bunch of ring marks all over it. But stuff like that is sort of, that's a problem.
It can be very obvious.
It can be.
If it's equipment, I think more times than not, it's obvious if you dig into it.
Anyway, so for what it's worth, if your equipment seems to be working right, but you miss, that's okay.
Yes, but learn something from it.
Learn something from it. Yes,
and always remember too. This is probably digging a little too deep, but always remember what you did right. Don't just think about what happened that was wrong, and don't think about the miss. Think about, okay, well, I did all these other things right, because your ability to think positively impacts you hitting targets too.
I like your positivity at the end of this, Rube. Focus on what you're doing right, and focus on hitting the target, not missing the target.
This is great. You'd be like a great Pee-wee shooters coach.
Whatever.
And on that note, whatever.
Yes. On that note, whatever.
Hey, I'll do wherever.
Scott, any final words?
No, I think we've probably covered enough.
We did it, everybody. Scott said so. Mark?
That's all I got, man.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And as usual, if you're ever missing out there and you just don't know why, you can always call us or talk to us, whatever works. Or go back and listen to this podcast again, because maybe something we said in here relates exactly to you. There's so many things. There's so many variables. Just that's why we love this sport. So if you're into it and you want everything to be super cut and dry and perfect all the time, you got into the wrong sport. You should probably try getting into theoretical physics instead of actual real world stuff. So, yes, with that said, we'll catch you next time. Let us know if anything in this conversation sparked up another idea you want to hear for another podcast. But in the meantime, we'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.
All right. That was a really good one, actually. I like that one a lot. It's good stuff in there.
A little bit of everything.
How do I hit?
Tech stuff, inspirational speaking, minutia,
Hunter bashing.
Yeah, there was a little bit of hunter bashing there.
For real though,
I was trying to work in the old traditional Wisconsin hunter shot. The pull the trigger now.
Hey, we did get to say
that timing is an art.
We did get to say that Scott was PRSing.
This is true.
Hey.
Success.
Feel good about that.
Well, thanks for having us.
All right, thanks, guys. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.